I pulled into my driveway in Pine Ridge Estates, Colorado, around 6 in the evening after a long haul from Denver to Grand Junction, and the familiar rumble of my Peterbilt's engine brake echoed through the quiet subdivision as I downshifted. The Jake brake was louder than usual in the stillness of the evening, but I didn't think much of it. I had been driving trucks for 15 years, and this was my home. If anyone had a problem with it, they could talk to me like an adult. My name is Paul Winters, and I'm a commercial truck driver who specializes in hauling construction equipment across Colorado. The money is good, and it lets me afford a decent house in a subdivision that, until recently, I thought was filled with reasonable people. I should have known better when I first moved in 2 years ago and saw the thick packet of HOA rules sitting on my kitchen counter, left by the previous owner as a warning I didn't fully appreciate at the time. I had barely shut off the engine when I saw her marching across the street. Karen Pemberton, the HOA president, was a woman in her late 40s with that specific haircut that seems to be standard issue for people who enjoy making others miserable. Her face was already red, and she was moving with the kind of purpose that told me this wasn't going to be a friendly, neighborly chat. "Excuse me," she called out before I even had both feet on the ground. "Mr. Winters, we need to talk about that noise." I grabbed my thermos and lunch bag from the cab, taking my time. "Evening, Karen. What noise are we talking about?" "That engine brake thing you just did. It's absolutely unacceptable in a residential area. Do you have any idea how loud that was?" My children were doing homework, and now they're completely distracted. I closed the truck door and looked at her evenly. "It's a Jake brake. It's part of how the truck slows down safely, especially when I'm carrying a heavy load. I've been using it for 2 years now." "Well, I'm telling you it needs to stop. It's disturbing the peace, and I'm certain it violates our HOA covenants." She crossed her arms, and I could see she had that look people get when they think they've already won an argument. "I'll look into it," I said, which was my polite way of saying I had no intention of changing how I operated my truck. "Have a good evening." I walked past her toward my front door, but she wasn't done. "I'm serious, Mr. Winters. If this continues, there will be consequences." I waved without turning around and went inside. My house was quiet and cool, a relief after hours on the road. I lived alone since my divorce 3 years ago, and I liked the peace of coming home to a space that was entirely mine. I made myself dinner, took a shower, and pretty much forgot about Karen Pemberton and her complaints. The next morning, I had a local delivery to make. I left early, around 5 in the morning, and I used my engine brake again as I navigated through Pine Ridge Estates. The subdivision sat on a hillside with some steep grades, and using the Jake brake was just good sense. It was safer than riding the regular brakes, and any truck driver worth their CDL would tell you the same thing. I got back home around 3 in the afternoon, and there was a letter stuck to my front door. It was from the HOA, and it was short and to the point. "Dear Mr. Winters, it has come to our attention that you are operating a commercial vehicle with an engine brake device within Pine Ridge Estates. This creates excessive noise that violates Section 4.7 of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA covenants regarding noise disturbances. You are hereby ordered to cease this activity immediately. Failure to comply will result in fines of $250 per incident. Sincerely, Karen Pemberton, HOA President." I read it twice, standing in my doorway. $250 per incident. That was insane. I pulled out my copy of the HOA covenants that night and read through Section 4.7. It talked about noise disturbances in general terms, but said nothing specific about engine brakes or commercial vehicles. It mentioned things like loud music after 10 at night, barking dogs, and construction noise during unreasonable hours. Nothing about Jake breaks. The next day was Saturday, and I had plans to wash my truck and do some maintenance. I was in the driveway with my pressure washer when Karen showed up again, this time with another woman I recognized as Linda Chen, who served on the HOA board. "Good morning, Paul," Linda said. She seemed more reasonable than Karen, but she still had that official look about her. "We wanted to follow up on the letter you received." "I got it," I said, continuing to spray down the side of my truck. "I also read the covenants. Nothing in there specifically prohibits engine brakes." Karen made an exasperated sound. "It's a noise disturbance. That's all that matters. You're creating an unreasonable amount of noise in a residential area. I'm slowing down a 40,000-pound vehicle safely. The noise lasts for maybe 5 seconds as I come through the neighborhood." "That's hardly unreasonable. We've had multiple complaints," Linda said. "It's not just Karen. Other residents have mentioned it too." I stopped spraying and looked at them. "How many complaints?" Karen shifted her weight. "That's not really relevant. It kind of is, though. If you're threatening me with fines, I think I have a right to know how many people actually have a problem with this." Linda glanced at Karen, then back at me. "3 residents have mentioned it, including Karen." "So 3 people out of what? 200 homes in this subdivision. And you're ready to fine me $250 every time I come home." "The rules apply to everyone equally," Karen said. "If we make an exception for you, we'll have to make exceptions for everyone." "I'm not asking for an exception. I'm saying the rule doesn't apply to what I'm doing. My engine brake doesn't violate anything in the covenants." Karen's face was getting red again. "We'll see what the board says about that. We're having an emergency meeting on Monday evening and you're required to attend." "I'll be there," I said. 7 o'clock, 6:30, Karen corrected. "Don't be late." They left, and I finished washing my truck. I called my buddy Marcus that afternoon. He was a truck driver too, and he lived over in Lakewood in a regular neighborhood without an HOA. I told him what was going on, and he laughed. "Man, that's why I'll never live in one of those places. They've got nothing better to do than make up problems." "Yeah, well, I'm not backing down on this. Using the Jake brake is a safety thing." "You're right about that, but watch out, HOAs can get nasty. They'll fine you into the ground if they want to." Monday evening came, and I showed up at the Pine Ridge Estates clubhouse at 6:20. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front where the board members sat. Karen was in the middle, flanked by Linda and 3 other people I recognized from around the neighborhood. There were maybe a dozen other residents in the audience seats, probably there to watch the drama unfold. Karen called the meeting to order and went through some routine business first, approving minutes and discussing landscaping bids for the common areas. Then she got to what she called new business, which was really just my truck. "We have an ongoing issue with Mr. Paul Winters of 847 Ridgeview Drive. He operates a commercial truck and has been using an engine braking device that creates excessive noise throughout the subdivision. Despite being warned, he has continued this behavior." I raised my hand. "Can I speak?" Karen looked annoyed but nodded. "Go ahead." I stood up. "First, I haven't continued anything despite warnings because I only got your letter on Wednesday and I used my engine brake that morning before I even saw it. Second, the Jake brake isn't something I use for fun. It's a safety device that helps me slow down without wearing out my regular brakes. Third, nothing in the covenant specifically prohibits engine brakes." One of the other board members, a guy named Steve Morrison, spoke up. "But it does prohibit excessive noise. Define excessive." "My truck makes noise for maybe 5 to 10 seconds as I'm coming through the neighborhood. It's not like I'm laying on an air horn at midnight. It's just part of operating a heavy vehicle safely. Karen shuffled some papers. We've consulted with the HOA's attorney, and he agrees that your use of the engine brake constitutes a noise violation. Then I'd like to see that in writing because I don't agree, and if you start fining me, I'll challenge every single one. The room got quiet. A few residents whispered to each other. Karen looked like she wanted to explode, but she kept her composure. The board will vote on whether to impose fines for continued use of engine braking devices within Pine Ridge Estates. All in favor. 4 hands went up. Only Linda abstained. The motion passes. Mr. Winters, you are hereby notified that any future use of your engine brake within the subdivision will result in a fine of $250 per incident. This meeting is adjourned. I walked out of there angry but not surprised. I had dealt with bureaucratic nonsense before, but this was on another level. I went home and started researching. I looked up Colorado laws on engine brakes, HOA enforcement powers, and private road regulations. What I found was interesting. Colorado had laws that allowed municipalities to restrict engine brakes on public roads, but Pine Ridge Estates wasn't a municipality. It was a private subdivision with private roads. The HOA owned and maintained the roads, which meant different rules applied. More importantly, I found several cases where HOAs had been challenged and lost when their rules conflicted with reasonable use of property or created safety hazards. I decided to keep using my Jake brake, not out of spite, but because it was the safe thing to do. I wasn't going to risk brake failure or an accident just because Karen Pemberton didn't like the noise. Sure enough, 2 days later I got another letter in the mail. Notice of violation. Amount due, $250. Reason: use of engine brake on May 14th at approximately 6:05 a.m. They were serious. I didn't pay it. Instead, I wrote a response letter explaining my position and citing the research I had done. I sent it certified mail to the HOA management company that handled Pine Ridge Estates. Their response came back a week later. Pay the fine or face additional penalties, including potential legal action. I still didn't pay. My thinking was simple. Let them take me to court if they wanted. I'd rather spend money on a lawyer to fight this properly than just roll over and accept fines for something that wasn't wrong. The fines kept coming. Every time I came home from a job, another letter. After 3 weeks, they claimed I owed them $2,000. That's when things escalated. It was a Tuesday morning, around 6:30. I was coming home from an overnight haul to Pueblo, and I was tired. The sun was just starting to come up, and Pine Ridge Estates was quiet. I downshifted as I approached the steep section of Ridgeview Drive, and my Jake brake engaged with its characteristic loud rumble. It lasted maybe 8 seconds as I navigated the hill down to my house. I was backing the truck into my driveway when I saw the flashing lights. A Colorado state trooper had pulled in behind me, lights on. My heart sank. Karen had called the cops. I shut down the truck and climbed out. The trooper was a tall guy, maybe in his 30s, with a professional demeanor. His nameplate said Martinez. "Morning, officer," I said. "Something wrong?" "Got a call about a noise disturbance. Someone reported a truck using an engine brake in the neighborhood." I nodded. "That was me. I'm just coming home from work." "Can I see your license and registration?" I got him my documents and he looked them over. "You live here?" "Yes, sir." 847 Ridgeview Drive, right there. I pointed at my house. "And you're a commercial driver, 15 years. I haul construction equipment mostly." Trooper Martinez looked at my truck, then at me. "So what's this about an engine brake?" I explained the situation. "The HOA complaints, the fines, the whole thing." He listened without interrupting, and when I was done, he handed my documents back. "Let me make a call," he said. He went back to his patrol car, and I waited. It felt like forever, but it was probably only 5 minutes. When he came back, he had a neutral expression. "Okay, here's the deal. I talked to my supervisor and checked the laws. Engine brakes aren't illegal in Colorado. Some cities have ordinances against them on public roads, but Pine Ridge Estates is a private subdivision. These are private roads. So I'm not breaking any law." "No, sir, you're not." The person who called this in, Karen Pemberton, was pretty insistent that I cite you for something, but there's no violation here. Now, she might have an HOA issue with you, but that's a civil matter. It's not criminal, and it's not a traffic violation. Relief washed over me. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate you looking into it." "Between you and me," Martinez said, lowering his voice slightly, "I think your HOA is overreaching. You're using a safety device on your own vehicle on private property. They can make rules about a lot of things, but they can't override basic safety or create rules that contradict state law on private roads. My dad was a trucker. I get why you use the Jake brake. Can you tell Karen that?" He smiled slightly. "I already did. She wasn't happy, but I made it clear that I'm not coming back out here for this issue again unless there's an actual law being broken. If she calls again about your engine brake, the call won't be dispatched." We shook hands, and Martinez left. I saw Karen standing in her driveway across the street, arms crossed, watching everything. She didn't wave or come over. She just stared, and I could tell she was furious that her attempt to get me in legal trouble had failed. I went inside and slept for a few hours. When I woke up, I called a lawyer. I figured it was time to get professional help with this situation. The lawyer I contacted was named Robert Chen, and his office was in Castle Rock. He specialized in HOA disputes, and when I told him my story over the phone, he agreed to meet with me. 2 days later, I was sitting in his office, going through all the documentation. The HOA letters, the fines, my responses, pictures of my truck, everything. Robert was in his 50s, glasses, methodical in his approach. He read through everything carefully. "This is interesting," he said. "They're claiming a noise violation, but their covenant is vague. And you're right that nothing specifically prohibits engine brakes. Can they fine me for this? They can try, but whether it would hold up is another question. The issue is that engine brakes are a recognized safety device for commercial trucks. HOAs have broad powers, but they can't create rules that are arbitrary or that conflict with reasonable use of property. You need your truck for work. You live on a hill. Using the engine brake is reasonable and safe. So what do I do? First, I'll send them a letter on your behalf explaining that you're not paying these fines and why. Second, if they pursue this, they'll likely put a lien on your property for unpaid fines. At that point, we'd have to challenge it, probably in court. Third, you could preemptively sue them for harassment and ask the court to declare their enforcement invalid. How much would that cost? Depends on how far it goes. A few thousand if they back down quickly. Could be 15 or 20,000 if it goes to a full trial. I thought about it. I didn't have that kind of money lying around, but I also wasn't going to let the HOA push me around indefinitely. Let's start with the letter and see how they respond. Robert drafted a detailed letter that laid out the legal arguments. He cited Colorado law on private roads, cases involving HOA overreach, and specific language about safety devices on commercial vehicles. He sent it to both the HOA board and their management company. The letter was firm but professional, and it made clear that I wasn't backing down. The response came back 10 days later, and it was not what I wanted to hear. The HOA rejected everything Robert had argued. Their lawyer had written a response that basically said the HOA had the authority to regulate noise regardless of the source, and that my continued refusal to pay fines was a violation of the covenants I had agreed to when I purchased the property. "They want to fight," Robert said when we talked on the phone. "The question is, do you want to give them one?" I thought about it for maybe 2 seconds. "Yeah, I do. This is principle now. They're wrong and they need to know it." "Okay. I'll file a lawsuit asking the court to declare their fines invalid and to issue an injunction preventing them from further enforcement. It'll probably take 6 months to a year to resolve, depending on the court schedule." The lawsuit was filed in Douglas County District Court in early July. The HOA was named as the defendant, along with Karen Pemberton personally for her role in the harassment. The filing made the local news. A reporter from the Castle Rock News Press called me and asked for an interview. I agreed, figuring public pressure might help. The article came out a few days later with the headline, "Truck Driver Sues HOA Over Engine Brake Dispute." It laid out the facts pretty fairly, and the comments section online was overwhelmingly in my favor. People were calling the HOA petty and Karen a busybody. A few commenters sided with the HOA, saying I should just respect my neighbors and find another way to slow down, but they were in the minority. The publicity seemed to embolden Karen rather than embarrass her. She doubled down. The HOA board passed a new rule specifically prohibiting engine brakes, air brakes, and any other loud braking devices within the subdivision. They sent out a notice to all residents, and they increased my fines retroactively, claiming I now owed over $5,000. Robert filed an emergency motion with the court asking for a temporary restraining order against the HOA's enforcement. The judge scheduled a hearing for late August. In the meantime, I kept using my Jake brake. What else was I going to do? I had a job to do and a truck to operate safely. The hearing was on a Wednesday afternoon. I took the day off work and met Robert at the courthouse. The HOA's lawyer was there, a slick guy in an expensive suit named Gregory Altman. Karen was there too, sitting in the gallery with Linda and Steve from the board. Judge Patricia Morneau presided. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, and she got right to business after both sides were introduced. "Mr. Chen, you're asking the court to issue a TRO preventing the HOA from enforcing fines against your client. Tell me why." Robert stood. "Your Honor, the HOA is attempting to fine my client for using a federally recognized safety device on his commercial vehicle on private roads where no law prohibits such use. The engine brake is a critical safety feature, especially for a truck that weighs up to 80,000 pounds when loaded. The HOA's covenant regarding noise is vague and doesn't specifically address engine brakes. More importantly, Colorado law does not prohibit engine brakes on private roads, only on certain public roads by municipal ordinance. The HOA is overstepping its authority and creating a safety hazard by trying to prevent Mr. Winters from using his engine brake." Judge Morneau looked at Altman. Response: Altman stood. "Your Honor, the HOA has broad authority to regulate activities within the subdivision to protect property values and quality of life for residents. The noise created by Mr. Winters' engine brake is excessive and disturbs the peace. Multiple residents have complained. The HOA's covenant clearly prohibits excessive noise, and Mr. Winters is violating that covenant. The fact that engine brakes aren't specifically mentioned is irrelevant. The covenant covers all sources of excessive noise. Has the HOA defined what constitutes excessive noise?" the judge asked. "The board has discretion to make that determination on a case-by-case basis. So no objective standard." Altman hesitated. The board uses reasonable judgment based on resident complaints and the impact on the community. Judge Morneau flipped through some papers. I've read your complaint, Mr. Chen, and the HOA's response. I've also reviewed the covenants in question. Here's my concern. If I grant this TRO, I'm essentially telling the HOA they can't enforce what they believe is a valid rule. But if I deny it, Mr. Winters could be facing thousands of dollars in fines that may ultimately be found invalid. That's a harsh result either way. Your Honor, Robert said, the issue is that the HOA is imposing fines for conduct that isn't clearly prohibited. Engine brakes are not mentioned in the covenants. The noise they create is brief and necessary for safety. Without the TRO, my client will continue to be fined simply for coming home from work. Mr. Altman, why can't Mr. Winters slow down using his regular brakes? He can, Your Honor. He chooses to use the engine brake because it's more convenient, but it's not required. I whispered to Robert and he nodded. Your Honor, may my client address that point? Go ahead. I stood up, feeling awkward in the formal setting. Your Honor, using the engine brake isn't about convenience. It's about safety. Regular brakes can overheat and fail when you're slowing down a heavy vehicle repeatedly, especially on hills. The Jake brake helps cool the regular brakes and provides more controlled stopping. Every truck driver is taught to use their engine brake when possible. It's industry standard. Thank you, Mr. Winters, Judge Morneau said. She thought for a moment. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm granting a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from collecting or imposing new fines related to engine brake use pending a full hearing on the merits. That hearing will be scheduled within 60 days. In the meantime, Mr. Winters, you may continue to use your engine brake, but I strongly encourage you to be mindful of the time of day and to minimize the noise where reasonably possible. This doesn't resolve the underlying dispute, but it maintains the status quo while we sort this out properly. It was a partial victory. I wouldn't be fined in the short term, but the case was far from over. We walked out of the courthouse, and Karen was waiting on the steps. This isn't over, she said to me directly. You think you can just ignore the rules. You're going to lose, and when you do, you'll owe every penny of those fines plus our legal fees. Karen, why are you so obsessed with this? I'm just trying to do my job and live my life. You're ruining our neighborhood. Property values are going to drop because people don't want to live near a truck yard. It's not a truck yard. It's one truck parked at my house, and I'm willing to bet property values are just fine. She started to say something else, but Linda pulled her away. Robert and I went to a nearby diner to debrief. That went well, he said. Judge Morneau is fair. I think we have a good shot at winning this. What happens if we do? The court would declare the HOA's fines invalid and order them to stop enforcing this particular rule against you. You might also be able to recover your legal fees if the judge finds the HOA acted in bad faith. And if we lose, you'd owe the fines, probably their legal fees, and you'd have to stop using the engine brake or move. The full hearing was scheduled for late September. In the meantime, I kept working and tried to live normally, but the tension with the HOA didn't go away. Karen seemed to be watching my every move. I'd see her peering out her window when I came and went. She started filing complaints about other things. My grass was too long. My trash cans were left out too late. My truck was parked at a slight angle in my driveway. Each complaint resulted in a letter from the management company. Most of them were petty and easy to dismiss, but it was clear Karen was trying to build a case that I was a problem resident who didn't follow any rules. Robert told me to document everything, take pictures, and keep copies of all correspondence. One Saturday in mid-September, things took a bizarre turn. I was working on my truck in the driveway, changing the oil when a vehicle I didn't recognize pulled up. It was a white sedan, and two men in suits got out. They walked up to me with official-looking clipboards. "Paul Winters." One of them asked. "That's me. We're with Eagle Property Inspections. The HOA has hired us to conduct a compliance inspection of your property." I stood up, wiping my hands on a rag. "A compliance inspection? For what?" "We're checking for covenant violations." "It's within the HOA's rights per the governing documents." I never got notice of any inspection. The man showed me a letter dated a week earlier. "This was mailed to you. It states we'd be conducting inspections in your area." I vaguely remembered getting a general notice about inspections, but I had assumed it was routine for everyone, not targeted at me specifically. "Okay, fine. What do you need?" They walked around my property, taking pictures and notes. They measured things, looked at my landscaping, checked my paint colors, examined my driveway. The whole process took about 30 minutes. When they were done, they thanked me and left without saying what they had found. A week later, I got a report in the mail. According to Eagle Property Inspections, I had 7 violations. My front door color was not on the approved list. My mailbox post was a ½ inch too far from the curb. I had weeds in my flower bed. My driveway had an oil stain. My house numbers were the wrong font. My garden hose was visible from the street. And my truck, when parked in the driveway, extended 6 inches past the rear line of my house, which apparently violated some setback rule I had never heard of. The total fines for these violations: $1,750. I called Robert immediately. "They're retaliating. This is insane." "I agree. We'll add this to the lawsuit. This actually helps us because it shows a pattern of harassment. Take pictures of your neighbor's properties. I guarantee you'll find similar or worse violations that the HOA isn't citing." I spent that afternoon walking around Pine Ridge Estates with my phone camera. Robert was right. I found mailboxes at wrong distances, visible garden hoses, oil stains on driveways, weeds, non-approved door colors, and even a boat parked in someone's driveway that extended way past their house line. I documented everything carefully, noting addresses and taking clear photos. The full hearing finally arrived on September 28th. This time it was more formal, held in a larger courtroom. Both sides presented evidence. Robert called me as a witness, and I explained my job, why I used the engine brake, and the harassment I had experienced from the HOA. He introduced the photos I had taken showing selective enforcement. The HOA's lawyer called Karen as a witness. She testified about the noise complaints and claimed multiple residents were upset. But under cross-examination, Robert got her to admit that only 3 people had actually complained in writing, and one of those was her own husband. "Mrs. Pemberton, isn't it true that you personally dislike Mr. Winters?" "I don't have any personal feelings about him. I'm just enforcing the rules." "But you've filed 17 separate complaints against him in the past 4 months, haven't you? Because he keeps violating the rules. Yet you haven't filed any complaints against other residents with similar violations. Why is that?" Karen stumbled over her answer, and it was clear to everyone in the courtroom that this was personal for her. Robert also called Trooper Martinez as a witness. Martinez testified about the morning he was called to my house and confirmed that engine brakes are legal on private roads in Colorado. "In your professional opinion, Officer Martinez, is there a safety reason for Mr. Winters to use his engine brake?" "Absolutely. It's standard practice for commercial vehicles, especially on hills or when carrying heavy loads. It reduces wear on the regular brakes and provides better vehicle control." The HOA's lawyer tried to argue that the safety concern was overblown and that I could just use my regular brakes or drive more slowly. But Martinez was firm in his testimony that engine brakes are considered an essential safety feature in the trucking industry. The hearing lasted 4 hours. When it was over, Judge Morneau said she would issue a written ruling within 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were nerve-wracking. I kept working, kept using my Jake brake, and tried not to think about what would happen if I lost. Robert was optimistic but cautious. These cases can go either way. A lot depends on how the judge views HOA authority versus individual property rights. The ruling came down on October 12th. I was at home when Robert called me. "We won," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Judge Morneau ruled completely in your favor." "What did she say?" "Let me read you the key part. The court finds that the HOA's attempt to prohibit engine brake use is unreasonable and exceeds its authority under the covenants. Engine brakes are a federally recognized safety device essential to the operation of commercial vehicles. The covenant provision regarding noise disturbances is vague and does not specifically prohibit engine brakes. Moreover, the evidence shows that the HOA has selectively enforced its rules against Mr. Winters in a manner that suggests harassment rather than legitimate governance. The court hereby declares all fines related to engine brake use invalid and enjoins the HOA from further enforcement of such fines. Additionally, the court finds that the HOA acted in bad faith and orders it to pay Mr. Winters reasonable attorney fees and costs. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. So it's over, the main case is. The HOA could appeal, but I doubt they will. This was a pretty thorough ruling. What about all those other fines they hit me with? The mailbox and the door color and all that? The judge didn't specifically rule on those, but given her findings about selective enforcement, I think we can challenge them successfully. Let me send a letter to the HOA pointing out that those fines appear to be retaliatory and see if they back down. They did. Within a week of Judge Morneau's ruling, I received a letter from the HOA's management company stating that all outstanding fines against me were being waived and that no further action would be taken. The letter was formal and cold with no apology, but I didn't care. I had won. The next HOA board meeting was in early November. I didn't usually attend these meetings, but I decided to show up for this one. The clubhouse was packed. Apparently word had gotten around about the lawsuit and the judge's ruling, and people wanted to see what would happen. Karen called the meeting to order, looking pale and tired. She went through the agenda quickly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. When it came time for new business, a resident named Tom Garcia stood up. "I'd like to make a motion for the board to issue a formal apology to Paul Winters for the harassment he endured." Karen looked like she had been slapped. "That's not necessary. The matter has been resolved legally." "It is necessary," another resident said, a woman named Patricia Lee. "The judge specifically said the board acted in bad faith. That's a serious finding, and it reflects poorly on all of us. We should acknowledge the mistake and make it right." There was murmuring of agreement around the room. Linda made a motion to draft an apology letter, and it passed 4-1, with only Karen voting against it. Then Steve Morrison spoke up. "I also think we need to discuss leadership. This lawsuit cost the HOA over $30,000 in legal fees, and we lost. That money comes from all of our dues. I don't think the board handled this appropriately." Karen stood up abruptly. "If you have a problem with my leadership, you can call for a vote of no confidence." "I am," Steve said. "I'm calling for a vote right now." The room erupted in discussion. According to the HOA bylaws, A vote of no confidence required a majority of the board plus 20% of homeowners present at a meeting. With the packed room, the threshold was easily met. The vote was held by secret ballot. 20 minutes later, the results were counted. Karen had been removed as HOA president by a vote of 73 to 21. Linda was elected as the new president. Karen gathered her things in silence and walked out of the clubhouse without a word. I felt bad for her in a way. She had let her need for control destroy her standing in the community. But I also felt vindicated. This hadn't been about my truck or noise. It had been about power and her inability to accept that someone would challenge her authority. Life in Pine Ridge Estates returned to normal after that. Linda was a reasonable president who focused on actual community issues rather than petty enforcement. I continued to use my Jake brake when necessary, and nobody complained. The apology letter from the board arrived in early December, and while it was somewhat perfunctory, I appreciated the gesture. Robert's bill for legal fees came to just under $18,000. The court ordered the HOA to pay it, which they did without further argument. I never had to pay a cent beyond the initial retainer. One afternoon in late December, I was washing my truck when Linda walked over from her house down the street. We had never been close, but the relationship was cordial now. "Hey, Paul, I wanted to thank you," she said. "For what?" "For standing up to Karen. A lot of us thought she was out of line on various things, but nobody wanted to be the one to challenge her. You forced the issue, and honestly, the HOA is better off for it. I wasn't trying to start a revolution. I just wanted to do my job without being harassed. I know, but it worked out. And I wanted to apologize for my part in it. I should have pushed back harder when Karen first started targeting you. You abstained on the first vote. That counted for something." She smiled. "Well, anyway, if you ever have issues in the future, my door is open. We're neighbors, and that should mean something." Christmas came and went. I spent it with my parents up in Fort Collins, and it was nice to have the legal drama behind me. When I returned to Pine Ridge Estates after the holiday, there was a new family moving into Karen's house. I learned from Tom Garcia that Karen and her husband had decided to sell and move to a different subdivision in Parker. I couldn't say I was sad to see her go. The new neighbors were nice, a young couple with a toddler named Jessica and Mark. Mark worked from home in tech, and Jessica was a teacher. The first time I used my Jake brake coming home past their house, I half expected a complaint. Instead, Mark waved at me from his garage and gave me a thumbs up. Later that week, he came over to introduce himself properly. "Hey, I heard about the whole HOA thing," he said. "That was crazy. Good for you for fighting back." "Thanks. It got pretty intense there for a while, I bet. We're not going to give you any trouble. Actually, I think it's kind of cool having a truck driver in the neighborhood. My kid loves big trucks." That made me laugh. "Well, if she ever wants to see inside the cab, let me know. I'm happy to show her." A few weeks later, I did exactly that. Little Emma was 3 years old and fascinated by my Peterbilt. I let her climb up into the driver's seat and honk the horn a couple times. Her parents took pictures, and Emma talked about Mr. Paul's big truck for days. According to Jessica, spring arrived, and with it came the HOA's annual meeting. Linda was running for re-election as president, and she won easily. The board also voted to revise the noise ordinance in the covenants to make it more specific. The new language explicitly allowed for normal vehicle operation sounds, including engine brakes, while still prohibiting genuinely excessive noise like loud parties late at night or construction work at unreasonable hours. I was actually asked to review the proposed language before it was finalized, which I thought was a nice touch. It showed that the new board was interested in being fair rather than arbitrary. One Saturday in April, I was at a truck stop in Denver when I ran into another driver I knew named Gary. We were both filling up and he mentioned he was thinking about buying a house. Looking at some places in Castle Rock, he said. Nice area. Yeah, just make sure it's not in an HOA if you can help it. That bad? I told him the whole story. By the end, he was shaking his head. Man, I've heard horror stories, but that's next level. Good thing you fought it. It was worth it. But honestly, if I could do it over again, I'd probably just buy a place outside an HOA to begin with. Most places around here have them though, don't they? Yeah, that's the problem. But if you do end up in one, just read the covenants carefully and make sure you know what you're getting into. As summer approached, I picked up more work and was on the road frequently. Each time I came home to Pine Ridge Estates, I used my Jake brake without a second thought. The sound that had once caused so much conflict was now just part of the neighborhood's daily background noise, no more noteworthy than a dog barking or a lawnmower running. I did notice that the subdivision seemed friendlier overall. People waved more, chatted at the mailbox, and there was less of the tension that had permeated everything during the Karen era. Tom Garcia organized a neighborhood barbecue in June, and almost 50 people showed up. It was the kind of community event that should have been happening all along, but had been suppressed by the previous board's hostile approach to governance. At the barbecue, several people came up to me and thanked me for taking on the HOA. It was a little embarrassing, honestly. I hadn't set out to be a community hero. I had just wanted to be left alone to do my job, but I appreciated the sentiment. One guy, an older resident named Frank, pulled me aside. You know, I had a similar issue with Karen a few years back. She tried to fine me for painting my fence the wrong shade of brown. Said it wasn't on the approved list, even though I had gotten approval from the architectural committee. I ended up just repainting it to make the problem go away, but I always regretted not fighting back. Why didn't you? Honestly, I was afraid of the cost and the hassle. Legal battles are expensive and stressful, but watching you go through it and win, I realized that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself even if it's hard. It was definitely stressful, I admitted. But yeah, I'm glad I did it. By late summer, the lawsuit and all its drama felt like ancient history. I was busy with work, the neighborhood was peaceful, and life was good. I had even started dating someone, a woman named Dana Graham who worked as a nurse in Castle Rock. We had met at a coffee shop, and she thought the whole HOA story was hilarious. You fought the HOA and won, she said over dinner one night. That's like slaying a dragon in modern suburban terms. It felt like it at the time, but honestly, it was just about being able to come home in peace. Still, most people would have just given up and paid the fines. I'm too stubborn for that, she laughed. I'm starting to figure that out. In September, almost exactly a year after Judge Morneau's ruling, I got an unexpected call from Robert. Paul, I wanted to give you a heads up. I just got contacted by another truck driver who lives in an HOA in Thornton. He's having the exact same problem you had. Engine brake complaints, threatened fines, the whole thing. Seriously. Yeah. He found out about your case through an article online and wants to know if we can help him. I told him I'd reach out to you first since your case set a good precedent. Tell him to call me. I'm happy to talk about what I went through. The driver's name was Mike Patterson. We talked on the phone for over an hour. His situation was nearly identical to mine. HOA president with a grudge, vague noise ordinances, threats of fines. I gave him Robert's contact information and told him about the legal arguments that had worked in my case. The key thing, I said, is that engine brakes are legal on private roads in Colorado and they are a safety device. The HOA can't override that without being specific in their covenants, and even then, a court might find it unreasonable. Did you ever think about just giving up? Mike asked. Honestly, a few times. But it was the principle of the thing. What they were doing was wrong, and I knew it. Mike ended up hiring Robert and filing a similar lawsuit against his HOA. Last I heard, they settled out of court. The HOA agreed to drop all fines and to revise their noise ordinance. Mike didn't have to go through a full trial like I did, which probably saved him a lot of stress. As fall turned to winter and the one-year anniversary of my victory passed, I reflected on everything that had happened. It had been an exhausting, expensive, and frustrating ordeal. But it had also taught me something important about standing up for yourself and not letting bureaucratic bullies push you around. Pine Ridge Estates was a good place to live now. The HOA under Linda's leadership was reasonable and focused on actual community improvement rather than nitpicky enforcement. My relationship with Dana was going well, and she had even started talking about moving in together, possibly into a house we'd buy together outside of any HOA. I've learned my lesson, I told her. Next time, no HOA. Works for me. I like the idea of painting my front door whatever color I want without getting permission from a committee. One cold evening in December, almost 18 months after the whole thing started, I was pulling into Pine Ridge Estates after a long haul from Wyoming. It was snowing lightly, and the subdivision looked peaceful and pretty with Christmas lights on most of the houses. I downshifted as I approached the hill on Ridgeview Drive, and my Jake brake engaged with its familiar rumble. The sound echoed through the quiet street for a few seconds, then faded as I rolled into my driveway. I shut down the truck and sat there for a moment, feeling grateful. Grateful that I had fought back, grateful that the legal system had worked, grateful that I lived in a community that had eventually done the right thing. I climbed down from the cab and saw Mark from next door shoveling his driveway. He waved. "Hey Paul, good to see you back. Road's okay?" "Slick in some spots but manageable. You need help with that?" "Nah, I'm almost done, but thanks." I went inside my house, made some coffee, and started unpacking my things from the road. My phone buzzed with a text from Dana. "Dinner tomorrow night, my place." "Sounds perfect," I replied. Life was good. The truck made its noise, nobody complained, and I could just be a regular guy living in a regular neighborhood doing a regular job. It had taken a lawsuit, thousands of dollars, and more stress than I cared to remember, but I had earned the simple right to come home in peace. That was worth everything.